All right, everyone. So today, let's talk about artifacts, specifically when you don't want to continue leveling artifacts. So which artifacts are not going to be worth taking up to plus 16? And this is going to be one of those things where if you don't have the proper knowledge, you are easily going to waste millions, if not tens of millions of silver leveling up artifacts that you don't need to. And after playing for almost a full year and leveling up my fair share of artifacts, I could safely say I have wasted a lot of silver leveling stuff up that I did not need to. So hopefully I can share with you guys the mistakes that I made and the things that I learned so that you guys don't have to repeat what I've done. So let's talk about the different actual rarities of artifacts. So we have our white artifacts, which are commons, the greens, uncommons, the blues, which are rares, purples, which are epics, and then of course the orange ones, which are legendary. And you might think that the common artifacts, because they are the worst ones, you're going to take the least number of these to plus 16, and then legendaries, because they are the best, you're going to be taking most of them up to plus 16, but that's actually not true. It's a little bit more complicated than that. I would say the majority of artifacts that you take up to plus 16 are going to be epics, which are your purples, or even blues, which are the rares. And that is because they have enough good stats, even though they don't have as much potential to have as many good stats as a legendary. They also rely a lot less on RNG, so they're kind of in that sweet spot of having enough good stats, but relying little enough on RNG to be able to take a whole lot of them up to plus 16. Legendaries can definitely be a double-edged sword. Sure, they have the potential to be some of the best artifacts in the game, but they really rely super heavily on RNG, so they're going to be a massive gamble, and the more gambly that they are, the less likely you're going to want to be to take them all the way up to plus 16, because that's a pretty big silver investment. I don't want to jump too far ahead of myself, though. Let's jump back from legendary artifacts to commons and talk about those, because common artifacts absolutely still have their place in Raid Shadow Legends, especially for newer and more intermediate players. But as you kind of get to the mid and the late game, I would say most common artifacts are not going to be worth taking past plus 8 or so. Now, if you do somehow stumble upon a really good, 5-star common artifact, especially if it's, one of the gloves, chest, or boot slots where you also have to roll the main stats and not just the substats, like if you get really good 5-star common crit chance gloves or crit damage gloves or speed boots, something of that nature, it's totally fine to use them and even level them up, but probably not going to be worth taking most of them all the way up to plus 16. Now, there are still going to end up being some exceptions, and I'll talk about those. So one of the exceptions is going to be if it is a common artifact that is really important for a particular set, that's going to be difficult to find a replacement, like the shield set, for example. I even have a video from about a week or so where I go into the details of how good the shield set is. And if you cannot find another piece of the shield gear, and the only thing that you have is, like white gloves, and they're really good. Let's say they have HP percentage on them, or if you have boots, they're 5-star shield boots that have speed on them, or something of that nature. It's going to be tough to find a replacement. You really want to make sure that you have that set completed. So at that point, it's fine to take them up to plus 12 or even plus 16, depending on what substats they roll. But most common artifacts that aren't in that category are not going to be worth it. The other exception is if you did somehow manage to get really lucky and stumble upon, for example, like 6-star speed boots, which you can't actually technically get in the Nightmare campaign. If you have 6-star speed boots, which are very unique, part of a very good actual gear set, and they have decent substats, it's going to be tough to replace those even with rares, epics, or legendaries, and at that point, it might be worth considering taking up to plus 16. But besides those few exceptions, not really going to be worth it. Now let's go back to legendaries and talk about that double-edged sword, because legendaries have the potential to be some of the best artifacts in the game, but the problem with legendaries is because they have the potential to be some of the best, they're also going to be some of the hardest items to actually gear and roll up properly. So with legendary items, you have access to the information of all the substats before you even start rolling an item. Whereas everything else, at some point while rolling up the item, you're going to have to rely on RNG to unlock one of those substats. Like, if we just take out a quick glance at any of the gear that I have, you'll see here that rares have 2 rolls that are available to you right away, but then you have to rely on RNG at plus 12 and plus 16 to unlock those substats. Epics only have 1, and that's going to be at plus 16. They start off with 3 of the rolls already unlocked, and then greens are going to start off with 1 roll unlocked, which was, for example, these boots. When I got them before I started leveling them up, they came with defense. And then the critical rate was unlocked randomly by RNG at plus 8, and that'll happen again at plus 12 and plus 16, whereas legendaries will have all of their rolls unlocked right away. So you know right off the bat how many of those rolls are good, how many of those rolls are bad. Now, if you got really lucky and you find a legendary item where all of the rolls are really good, that's great. It's very rare for that to happen, though, and you could get tons of legendaries that just have trash rolls before you find one that has somewhat decent rolls. The problem that people get themselves into is when they find a legendary item that has, let's say, 1 really good roll, like speed. If you have a legendary that you came across that has a speed roll, but then the other 3 substats are absolute garbage, you now run into the predicament where, is it going to be worth taking this up to plus 16 just because it has that speed roll on it? And I would say if you don't really get lucky and you don't land on that speed roll right away at plus 4, you can try to risk it and go up to plus 8, but at that point, if all you've rolled is the garbage rolls, I would say stop working on that legendary. Even though it does still have that speed roll, it's a legendary, it looks flashy, it's just not going to be worth it. There's too much RNG involved, and you absolutely don't want to spend the million plus silver to get it up to plus 16 just to try to land on one of those 4 rolls. If you find yourself in that situation, you're gambling a little bit too much on the stats of an item, and I would avoid taking it. So now let's actually go back from legendaries and start talking about that sweet spot, which are going to be your epics and your rare items. Now, these items, they are technically not going to have as much potential as legendary items do, but they're also going to rely a lot less on RNG. And rare items are a fantastic example, and I want to talk about rares because this is going to be, especially for intermediate players, a great rarity of items to take to plus 12 and plus 16. So let's talk about specifically with rares. Now, rares are going to come with, you're going to have the information of 2 of those stats. So if I take a look at any of the rares that I actually have, even if they're not at plus 8, you'll see that you have the information of 2 of the abilities. So like these speed boots have flat HP and flat attack. Not really that good. This one I'm probably going to throw into the dumpster and sell because it started off with 2 bad rolls. It's just not going to be worth it in any way, shape, or form. Then you have, boots like these ones that have crit damage and attack percentage. On defense boots, I would say one of these rolls is good, one of them is not so great. And fortunately for me, I actually rolled the good one twice, which is that crit damage roll, and I didn't roll the bad one. Now, the good thing is with rare items, because there's only 2 possible outcomes, the chance of you actually getting the good roll twice is pretty high. It's 25%. Whereas if you go back to legendaries, and now you've only got 1 roll that is good, which is speed, and you've got 3 other competing rolls, the chance of you landing on speed twice at plus 8 is 1 in 16 instead of 1 in 4. So much, much lower odds. So when it comes to a rare, if you have like 1 good stat and 1 bad stat, for example, like these boots, you have a 25% chance to roll the good stat twice, a 75% chance to roll 1 good stat and 1 bad stat, and then a 25% chance for the item to completely brick out and roll the bad stats twice. And I would say if you do get lucky and you roll on that good stat that you're looking for, 25% of the time, it's going to be worth taking that item up from plus 8 now to plus 12. And you're going to see whether it is going to unlock a good 3rd stat. Now, this is going to rely on RNG. So I'm just going to take these boots up to plus 12 as an example. And because I rolled that good stat twice, it's definitely going to be worth it. Now, depending on what the plus 12 stat that is unlocked is, that's going to determine whether it's worth taking the item up to plus 16. But because it's a 25% chance of getting the good stat twice, rares are really in that good middle ground of having a decent amount of stats, but not relying too much on RNG for you to be able to do so. So look at that. We got crit rate. Absolutely phenomenal. That is a great, actually, that is probably the best roll that could have unlocked from these boots right here. So now, because we've got the good stat that rolled twice at +8, we avoided rolling attack, and we also unlocked a good roll at +12. These boots are going to be good to go to upgrade to +16. So I really like rares because of that. Now, they won't have as much potential as, epics and legendaries, but they rely a lot less on RNG. Now, epics are a bit different. Also still going to be a lot of items that you take to +16 are going to be epics, but there's a really, really big difference when it comes to epics between having one good stat and two bad stats, and then two good stats and one bad stat. Now, if you do get really lucky and you find an epic with 3 good stats that are on it, this is rare, of course, you're good to go. Like if it has speed, crit chance, crit damage, you don't even have to worry about it. But a lot of the times, you're going to find epics that have 1 good roll and 2 bad rolls, or 2 bad rolls and 1 good roll. And a major, major mistake that I would say a lot of people make is they focus too much on the epics that have 1 good roll and 2 bad roll. That difference is huge. And I would say, unless you get really, really lucky and you roll the good roll twice before taking the item up to +12. So at +4, you roll the good roll, which is a 1 in 3 chance. And then at +8, you also roll the good roll again, which is another 1 in 3 chance. So a little over a 10% chance of that happening. I would say you want to avoid really working too much on those epics that you find that have the 1 good roll and 2 bad rolls. And I'm sure there are plenty of epics that I have that are kind of among that classification. Like these boots right here are going to be in that group, right? So we have defense boots. We've got flat HP, which is not really that great. That's going to be considered a bad roll. We've got defense, flat defense, which again, going to be considered a bad roll, even though they are in defense boots. Flat stats are just pretty bad overall. And then we've got that crit damage roll right here. So I gambled it up to +4 because it's really, really cheap. There's no RNG. It always 100% success goes up to +4. And now I would see and take it up to +8. And if it rolls HP or defense, because this is one of those epics that's 1 good roll, 2 bad rolls, unless it rolls crit damage again, then I'm completely done with this item. Now, if instead of, flat HP or defense, if it had crit chance, that would be a bit of a different story. Well, I got lucky there, and this one actually might be worth taking up to +12 because it did roll that crit damage twice. But if it rolled, instead of flat HP, if it had crit chance on it, that's a bit of a different story. Now, instead of only 1 in 3 chance of rolling one of the good stats, you have a 2 in 3 chance, and it's definitely going to be worth taking a lot more of those items up to +12 and +16. So I would say, especially for newer intermediate players, this is kind of going to be that point where a lot of people waste a lot of silver on particular epics. Now, you could still be more lenient on your gloves, chest, and your boots compared to your weapon elements and your shields. Because the gloves, chest, and boots are going to require a good main stat and not just the substats, it's going to be a lot more difficult to find really good boots because you're almost always going to be looking for speed boots, for example, or for gloves. You're almost always going to be looking for crit rate or crit damage gloves. So all the other ones are going to be garbage. Whereas your weapons, your helmets, and your shields, they always have that same main stat roll. So you could be a lot more picky with your weapons, helmets, and your shields when it comes to epics in comparison to your gloves, chests, and your boots. The final thing that I wanted to talk about is going to actually be your greens, which are going to be your uncommons. And I really haven't talked too much about greens because greens are pretty simple and very similar to commons. They're a step above commons, but still, I would say most greens are not going to be worth taking all the way up to +16. And with green items, it's very important. They come with one of the substats unlocked already. So do I have any in the market here? I don't have any in the market. I'm actually going to just show you guys a couple green items. In fact, on my account, I would say I'm really leaning away from greens on almost all of my champions at this point. So there's not many that I have left. Like these boots, these speed life boots came with defense as their stat. Now, if you come with a green item and it has a really bad roll on it right away, just don't even level it up. You want to make sure at the very least that that first roll is going to be good, because taking that green up to +4 is automatically 100% of the time going to give whatever roll it has a bonus roll right off the bat. Because there's no other competing rolls like with rares or epics where you have 2 and 3 rolls that RNG is going to decide what you get on, greens are always going to get that bonus roll right away on that first stat. So if it has a good one, you could take it up to +4, get that bonus roll, then take it up to +8 and see if you get another good roll, then maybe take them up to +12. But I would say very similar to commons, uncommons, most of the time, unless it falls into one of these exceptions where it's part of a really important set, or it's like something really unique like 6-star speed boots with speed, not going to be worth taking them to +16. So anyway, I've thrown a lot of information at you guys in this video today, so I'm hoping that this helped out at least a bit. Hopefully you guys save a lot of silver, because artifact upgrading is one of those things where if you don't have the proper knowledge, you can easily waste millions, if not tens of millions of silver upgrading stuff that you really don't need to. With that being said, that is going to be it for the video today. I hope that you guys enjoyed. If you want to help out, consider subscribing. Feel free to toss a quick like. And this is Salt of the Salty Guild, signing out.